Despite women's best intentions to use contraception, interference by male partners still left them exposed to an unintended pregnancy. Women often experience the second type of pregnancy controlling behavior after an unintended pregnancy occurred. These behaviors, which we label controlling pregnancy outcomes, were intended to force women to resolve the pregnancy in the manner that their partner wanted. Male partners use pressure and coercion, as well as threats, force, and violence to make women either keep the pregnancy or have an abortion. Some men even resorted to interfering with women's health care access. The following respondent's partner impregnated her against her will. He would force her to have sex and then refuse to withdraw. He kept stopping it. He kept track of when the appointments were, taking the car, saying the car wouldn't work, saying, I can't come because of this and this, but I have to be there for the abortion, but I have to work on this day. So he kept dragging it out because he wanted me not to be able to have it. Due to the delays imposed by her partner, the respondent did not end up having the abortion until 4 months gestation. She also had 4 other abortions with this partner. Respondents described that abusive partners made them feel guilty about their desire to abort, begging, badgering, and making promises to support the baby in order to pressure them into giving birth. They also reported more invasive tactics used, such as refusing to pay or help pay for the procedure, as well as going to the clinic and causing a scene. On the other hand, there were respondents, such as the following woman, who were pressured into having an abortion when they actually wanted to continue the pregnancy. He really wanted me not to keep it. I was under 18, so we had to go to a neighboring state without parental consent law. And I went to the clinic, and I remember only the lady asked me if I really wanted to have an abortion. But she gave me a paper, and she asked me if I wanted to do that if nobody else was making me. And I remember I just wanted to leave and not do it because I did want to keep the baby. But he told me, he was next to me, and he went like this and told me, tell her. Later in the interview, this respondent also shared that later in this abusive relationship, she also experienced a coerced birth. That said, not all women did what their partners wanted them to do. Some had abortions when their partners wanted them to keep the pregnancy. Some had children that their partners had wanted them to abort. However, these acts of resistance occurred much less frequently than adherence to their partner's demands. The third kind of pregnancy, of reproductive coercion experienced by our sample was post-pregnancy punishment. Just under half of the respondents that experienced any reproductive control were subjected to this type of behavior. This included denying paternity post-birth, calling a miscarriage an abortion, and carrying out abuse and other punishment after an abortion or birth. So, the results that I've just shared with you should be interpreted in light of the following limitations. As I noted before, we did not initially set out to explore reproductive control, and as a result, our questions were not aimed at gathering this information. These women's narratives reflect a moment in time and are not being positioned as a specific stage of violence in the timeline of an abusive relationship. In fact, there were some partners that engaged in reproductive control that were not actually identified as abusive by the respondents. Also, as this was a very specific sample, these results cannot be generalized to all women who have experienced intimate partner violence, nor to women who have not been in abusive relationships. Also, the data did not address other sources or types of coercion, such as social coercion from parents or peers, so the potential impact of that type of coercion is not accounted for. Lastly, as we only have the women's perspectives, these narratives only reflect the women's interpretation of the events that occurred and are subject to their biases. We did not interview men and cannot speak to their experiences or perspectives. So how can we use this information? Well, this data addresses an area of reproductive decision-making that has not been accounted for previously. It also sheds light on the connection between abuse and negative reproductive health outcomes. This is particularly useful information for healthcare providers, as these results indicate that traditional screening tools, like the questions that we actually use to select our sample, are inadequate for screening women who are experiencing reproductive coercion. Reproductive health professionals need to be aware of the possibility that partners are interfering with and influencing women's pregnancy-related decisions, particularly their contraceptive use. This knowledge could inform how providers administer care and better equip them to provide services for women that will not only suit the women's needs, but also help women protect themselves and maintain their reproductive autonomy. In fact, this study actually sparked another project in which a group of family planning clinics in California integrated questions on reproductive control into their abuse screening. One offshoot of this change is that providers of these sites have been better able to identify when a client may require more covert methods of contraception. Again, not all of the partners who engaged in reproductive control were identified by the respondents as abusive. This suggests that we need to look beyond violent relationships in order to fully capture the extent that this is happening. So, where do we go from here? Additional research is needed to get a fuller picture of reproductive control. Research on prevalence, long-term effects, and other challenges to women's reproductive autonomy are a few of the areas whose investigation could help clarify the extent of this phenomenon. Furthermore, research that seeks the perspective of men could be very instrumental towards elucidating the motivations and reasoning behind reproductive control. Male voices are not always heard in these discussions, but including their perspective might be especially useful in terms of developing a better theoretical understanding of this topic, as well as in developing ways to help women learn how to resist and counteract these behaviors. If you'd like further information about the article, I have copies available here. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you for sharing some of that very difficult data with us, Nikisha. Our final speaker is Donald McPherson, who was the former quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. For more than 20 years, he has used the power and appeal of sport to address complex social issues. He has paralleled a highly decorated football career with cutting-edge work on vital and contemporary issues that impact the lives of every American. With testimony before the U.S. Congress, appearances on national news, television, and lectures across North America, he has reached more than 1 million people. Mr. McPherson, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah. Let's make sure this one is on. Yes? Yes? Terrific. Let me take a quick shift and kind of talk about the larger issue of men's violence against women and what men's role has been historically and kind of where it is today. And what I think the challenges are and also where the opportunities are to really engage men in a meaningful way that is longstanding and productive. My background is as an activist and as a quote-unquote prevention worker. I started many years ago doing alcohol and substance abuse prevention work. I was a student athlete and a football player at Syracuse University, then in the NFL and the Canadian Football League, and was asked to be a part of prevention programs using what I refer to as prevention language and scare tactics, things that don't work. The mangled car that we sit out in front of the school to say that this is what happens if you drink and drive, the 2 a.m. commercial of a fried egg that's supposed to keep kids off of drugs, these scare tactics and prevention language that we use that has historically proven over and over in all those different ways not to be effective. And so I really started looking at more honest dialogues with young people around how they make decisions, where they're getting their information to make their decisions, and helping educate them to give them good information to make good decisions, not expecting them to make good decisions with bad information or, as I said, the horror stories or having them look at bad models to then to turn around and exhibit positive behavior. That's how I came to the work to men's violence against women. I went to Northeastern University to the Center for the Study of Sport and Society when I retired from football in 1994 and started to work with a gentleman named Jackson Katz, a name that may be familiar to some folks in the room, who was looking at the issue of men's violence against women as Quentin mentioned earlier, not as a women's issue, but as a men's issue. As a men's issue, recognizing that 90% of violence that's committed against women and girls is committed by men. It's our issue. It's a men's issue because we all, as men, have women in our lives that we care about. It's a men's issue. And I always say that if racism were a black issue, I would not be standing here or sitting here. White people confronted other white people, and slavery ended, and Jim Crow ended. And they did so by confronting the multitude of contributing factors: language, culture, economics, by confronting it in every single place that it existed. And that, to me, was what was so necessary for me as a man to be involved in the work to prevent violence against women, was not just to say to men that it's wrong and it's bad, but to really drill down about where we're making our decisions, how we're making our decisions, recognizing that in order for the violence to end, we as men have to be a part of the dialogue. We have to be a part of the solution. And that has to happen independent of women's voices. And then why I say that's critically important is that the way that myself and people like Jackson Katz came to this work, and I'm in the College Football Hall of Fame, and I am a feminist. I'm on the board of the Ms. Foundation for Women. And I can say those things, and they are important, but it's not the answer. And those of us who came to this work, the men of us who came to this work from the feminist movement, from the women's movement, from the domestic violence movement that came out of those movements, we have learned from women.